Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today I have my first Newfoundland election forecast. I just want to caveat here. I know this is not my usual style of map graphics. I will be doing that for any future Newfoundland videos. I just ran out of time for prepping this one, so I could not do my own. So I'm piggybacking on Yapham's to create this map because people have complained about the other ones in the other stopgap maps they've used in the past. So I hope this one's more readable. I'm only using 4 colors instead of the 6 I normally use, so this is going to look. Some of these writings are going to be less polarized on first glance than they should look. But basically, this red color here, that's 20 plus kind of thing. So there's a lot of writings that are more than 20, but it doesn't really matter. A lot of Newfoundland rural writings are very polarized. But with that, I'd like to shout out all my channel members. I really appreciate the support you guys give the channel. Make a lot of my life easier with balancing finances on the channel. And with that, let us begin. Oh, sorry. If you want to support the channel, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below. And, press that join button if you want to. But let us begin. I won't be too long on this one because it's not super clear to me at this time if there's an election coming in Newfoundland. I will admit to any newfies watching this, I have not paid the most attention to Newfoundland. But I have been looking at the polls. I have been watching to an extent. I'm not coming in with 0 here. But you're not going to get a 40-minute episode out of this. This is going to be a shorter one. But the main gist, what seems to be happening in Newfoundland is in an interesting political position. We don't have a ton of data to go off here. There's not a lot of polls. We've only had 5 since the PCs elected their new leader. We don't have a ton of by-election data. There's only been a couple by-elections. But what we can infer from federal results and the little data we do have is Newfoundland's undergoing a pretty substantial shift. Now, this is happening at the same time where the Liberals are not particularly changed, they're not getting less popular. I'll just show this up here with the headline numbers. So you can kind of see here in 2021 here, this is the old data on the left. It was about 48.6 to about 38.4, give or take, projected onto the current expected electorate for my model. And now it's 47.4 to 38.6. So that level really didn't change. And part of this could just very well be noise that the NDP's higher. Again, we don't have a lot of polls here, so one or two polls of the NDP being unreasonably high because of just margin of error, flukes, kind of stuff like that. That happens, not the pollster's fault. Can cause some of this to really bounce around. But the interesting thing here isn't that the headlines have changed. Again, we have almost the same margin of projected victory right now. But the regional balance is very different. So the first one, I'll just disclaim here on Labrador. The polling data that Narrative has for Labrador groups Labrador in with Western Newfoundland. And there's no good way to disambiguate that. So it's not great. This could be wrong. Very, very big asterisks on this Labrador number here. Very, very big asterisks. Because it's combined into 2, and I'm trying to break it out here. So I could be wrong breaking it out here. Maybe I should put it in with the Long Range Mountains collection of writings. But I don't really like doing that because it really does... Maybe you Newfoundlanders if you want to speak on this, but it doesn't really make sense to group Long Range Mountains over here with Newfoundland in my mind. I imagine that was done by Narrative to increase the sample size because Labrador is relatively sparsely populated. So it would probably be hard to get the correct sample to regionalize this otherwise. However, long-range mountains in Labrador are very different demographic areas, at least superficially. So I would be very surprised if they've actually vote similarly. I wouldn't break them out that way myself. But even with that said, the big one here is really the rural Newfoundland, which is everything that's not the Avalon Peninsula, versus the St. John's and its suburbs, and the rest of the Avalon Peninsula area. So these two blocks represent this section of Newfoundland. Actually, I'll zoom in. So this section of Newfoundland is represented by these two blocks. Rural represents this. I said rural because I didn't know what else to call that. I guess it's rural. I don't know. But you can see here that from 2020 to today, there has been a very substantial change. It went from 10-point lead for the Liberals to barely a 2.5-point lead for the Liberals in that region. Whereas if you look at the suburbs / Avalon Peninsula, it went from being almost a tie to being a near 6-point lead for the Liberals. And then St. John's itself, and I'll note that this is what I'm calling St. John's itself. This kind of red-orange. This one is not included, so it's these 6 here. No, sorry, that one is included. It's these ones here. That is what I'm calling St. John's for the purposes of these breakouts. Feel free to comment below if you think some of the other ones should be considered St. John's proper, the actual city, or if I included one that should not be included, because I can always move that around. But the point being here, you can kind of see here the NDP's flat, and then you have the Conservatives down and Liberals up, going from a 27-point lead to just shy of a 32-point lead. So what we're seeing is kind of the same trend we're seeing everywhere else in the world, every other election I'm covering, every other province. There is a polarization occurring along regional areas. The rurals are becoming more conservative. The urbs are becoming more left-wing, if you will. Though I will put a strong caveat on this. Andrew Furey's Liberal Party is perhaps the most conservative Liberal Party that actually has won an election in the country. I don't know how I would want to describe them on like the absolute scales of ideology. I would say they're still liberal, but they're probably the most quote-unquote right liberal, if that makes sense. So we're seeing this division break out here. And that actually leads to a very interesting question for the Newfoundland election. And if this happens to a degree that I think it could potentially happen, my model, anyone else who models this, could be hilariously wrong. Because if we see a big enough swing from rural to urbs, some of these ridings that are really safe for the Liberals here, like the ones I'm gesturing here, those could flip perhaps if we see a big enough polarizing swing occur. Conversely, some of these ones in like the suburbs, they could be a lot more liberal than I'm currently projecting. But unfortunately, this is the kind of issue you get with a lack of data, and it's one of the reasons I don't have like any highfalutin commentary or analysis to go into this video here. There's just 5 polls since the last leader. 5 polls in a year and a half, or year and a quarter, sorry, is not a lot of data. And yes, I could include polls before the last PC leader was elected. But the problem with that is, first off, the older the poll gets, the less relevant it is. But replacing the leader is a really big deal. It makes sense to draw starting from there. in the grand scheme of things here. Now, if I was covering the Newfoundland data the entire time, I would have all the other polls. But there's a marshalling of effort here. Adding polls that are 2-3 years old, you don't get much data from them. They don't have a lot of weight. And that's with me having a relatively high recency bias on things. Places that have much lower recency bias, yeah, it's a little more, sorry, I can rephrase this. And that's with me having a relatively low recency bias on things. Places that have people who do much higher recency biases, those would just get obliterated. Like, that's just texture on the graph. Like, you're talking about maybe changing, like, the 5th decimal place here. And I've had people comment before, it's like, how can you claim to have 5 decimal places of accuracy? I don't. The number generates that way. I do not have 5 digits of significant figures here. In fact, in a lot of senses, it's probably dishonest to even claim 1 sig fig, but who cares? Would you rather me truncate it or round it or just display it and claim accuracy I don't have? Or sorry, claim precision I don't have. Doesn't matter. Now, what this will mean though, especially as we compare with federal, because the federal and provincial elections could be happening very soon for both these for Newfoundland. And if one of them happens first, it will be a really good pretense for what's going to happen in the other one. Now, for a while now, I've had the suspicion that the Conservatives are going to win every single seat in Newfoundland federally. They're going to win 7 for 7. I'm including Labrador in this. They're going to win all 7 Newfoundland and Labrador seats federally. If you look at my model, I think it's 5-2 right now. That's from my last video. But my expectation by the end of the election is it's going to be just about 7-7. If it's not, it's going to be skin of the teeth hold-ons, some of these ridings to the Liberals in Newfoundland. And the reason for that prediction isn't just looking at the data per se. Obviously, I do look at data. But it's looking at a lot of long-term trends. And I'm very bullish on Newfoundland going very blue. And I think this will happen to an extent on the provincial level. The fact that Andrew Furey is much more centrist than Justin Trudeau or the federal Liberals might mean in this provincial election you're not going to see him get wiped out, you will not see the provincial Liberals get wiped out. I'm not saying the PCs could ever have a clean sweep, at least in the near future. But you're going to see him do a lot better in vote share, notably, than the federal Liberals will do because he's much more centrist. And a lot of the Newfoundland population is going to be more hesitant to fully embrace that switch, especially because some of the things that are causing it to switch faster federally aren't directly at play provincially. Things like, while you have a carbon tax, obviously, is a big one. Seal moratorium is another one. It's not seal moratorium, sorry. The seal quota is another one. Oil and gas exploration is another one. These are things that really help Newfoundland. But some of the big things that I think are going to cause this shift, or a relatively rapid shift you're going to see here, is in Newfoundland. There's about threefold reasons. The first reason why I think Newfoundland is on the precipice of a big shift, especially federally, is industry changes. Now, a lot of people will pull education. I myself put education in it. And that's mostly because it's an easy thing to ask. And it sort of works, but it's really a second order filter because the actual better filter would be career. Like industry someone works in. Because how someone works, what they do for a job matters more than their education level. The reason why university grads tend to be more left-leaning is because people who want to go into left-leaning careers get university degrees. Things like nursing, teaching, bureaucrats. Those groups lean left. and they get university degrees, which causes university degree holders to lean left. There's no systemic bias converting people into liberals at universities. It's just liberals go to university because they want jobs that university degrees get them. In modernity, conservatives don't go to university as much because the jobs they want, things like mining, things like farming, things like fishing, things like oil and gas, are not trades, are not university degrees. That's why they dominate the quote-unquote college-educated bracket, because the trade schools or other similar post-secondary kind of schools get jobs that conservatives in 2025 want. And what we're seeing in Newfoundland is the economy... Well, first off, we're seeing fishermen across Atlantic Canada switch to the right. You look at places like the South Shore in Nova Scotia, and this is the most pronounced, places like Queens County or Shelburne County were relatively competitive counties in 2019. And now you look, or like Lunenburg County, if you look at the provincial election, like that was a relatively competitive county. You look now, as of the 2024 election, and the PCs are putting up 30, 40, 50-point margins. I think they had a 65-point margin in Argyle just in the last election. 65-point margin. Crazy. You're seeing a lot of these communities shift to the right because they're seeing... It's kind of twofold that the left is a little too aggressive at fishing quotas. In other words, they're too tight on legal fishers, but they're not tight enough on illegal fishers. So a lot of legal fishermen end up getting their quotas cut or their seasons cut. There's an Elver fishery recently in Nova Scotia that had that happen. And I believe there's push from Newfoundland fishing communities to increase the cod quota because I guess the population's healthier. I don't know the specific details of how the fishing industry of different fish work, but I know people are pushing for these things. And the liberals and the left in general is really against this. So you're starting to see the economic incentive here align more with the conservatives because the conservatives are more willing to change these things. An example of this being the federal conservatives talking about changing ceiling quotas because, as per Poilievre's own video that he released in the spring of 2023, seals eat fish, fewer seals, more fish. Oversimplifying, but basically the claim is that the seals have overpopulated, and I believe you talk to Newfoundland fishermen, they'll probably vouch for that, have overpopulated because we're really the only hunter for them other than like possibly polar bears. And that is, again, causing some of the shift. But the other really big shift, too, is the big one in my mind. It's oil and gas. Now, Andrew Furey is going all in on oil and gas, which might be one of the reasons why I think he will do better than a lot of other liberals, or especially the federal liberals, because he doesn't have this animosity with the oil and gas industry. Because in principle, the oil and gas workers should not be as polarized as they are. They should probably lean conservative because of how the career sectors are breaking down. But the hostility that the federal liberals and the federal NDP have to oil and gas causes them to go from what should be a conservative-leaning demographic to being a conservative-dominant demographic. Places, oil and gas workers tend to vote like 80-point margins conservative. Or, if they're not voting like an 80-point margin, you might see like PPC getting like a reasonable percentage in an oil and gas town kind of thing. And as oil and gas production increases as a percent of GDP in Newfoundland, and it is, Newfoundland is doing really a lot of work to exploit the natural gas or the oil fields off their shore. And in the near future, if you see the provincial government under Andrew Furey or whoever the PC leader is, I forget his name, keep pushing for that, And then the feds back it. Like Poilievre is supporting that kind of resource development. You could see this rapidly start shifting things because the higher the population that's in that, because it's not just a matter of the workers themselves. And the same thing with fishing communities too. A fishing community doesn't vote the way it does because some men in that community are fishermen. It's because there are women who in that community whose husbands are fishermen. There are kids in that community whose dad is a fisherman. There are brothers and sisters and parents in that community whose sibling is a fisherman. There are just friends of unrelated reasons whose friend is a fisherman. My father-in-law is friends with a lobster fisherman, for example. They do stuff together. So then, in these communities, the people see what hurts their friend, and that does influence their vote. And the same thing with the oil and gas industry. Sure, let's say you might only get low thousands, maybe low tens of thousands of people who are actually literally employed by oil and gas companies. But those people have friends, they have family, and they will see that this affects them. Then you also have people who will see, oh look, the oil and gas is getting us all this money as a province. We should keep doing that because we need that money. Now there's better and worse ways to spend the oil and gas money, but that's a whole nother topic for another time. And then the third reason here that I really see Newfoundland being a prime candidate for a very big shakeup is demographics, specifically age. Now, generations are a thing that exist. People will sometimes claim they don't exist or that they're just a fiction of time, that you just put arbitrary boundaries on things. But that is not true. A generation is a real, tangible thing. What makes a generation is that they are born, like the most simple definition of a generation is one generation is the time from you're born to you have your first kid. And you're going to have people in cohorts like that. So that makes the very simple definition of generation. But the reason why that's not just an arbitrary grouping is because in the course of your adolescence, things will happen in the world. You'll have jobs, you'll have education, random things will happen. COVID will break out, the economy will collapse, or the economy will boom. Or the housing market will get destroyed, and then you have Zoomers now looking depressed as they can barely afford homes for the incomes that they have in the area. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the housing crisis is as big a problem in Newfoundland as it is everywhere else. I assume it's still a problem, but I've not looked at Newfoundland real estate prices relative to incomes. But the key here is generations end up having a character because of what happens to them. And there's also, nowadays, because fertility is very low, there's a character to generations based on who actually ended up having kids. If the most liberal people don't have children, the next generation is going to be less liberal. Just fundamentally. The biggest impact in your life is going to be the impact your parents gave you. The education they provided you, the lessons they taught you, the skills they gave you. So if you removed yourself from that cycle, that's going to be a big impact. But the core essence here is boomers, which are disproportionately a very large segment of Newfoundland's population because of the cod collapse, forcing a lot of people to leave Newfoundland. I believe they're coming back these days, but the Newfoundland's population, a lot of the young people had to leave because the economy collapsed in the 90s, because the feds did a really bad job monitoring the fisheries. And the boomers were one of the most ideologically liberal generations in history. Now, that does not mean boomers are voting lock ticket Liberal Party, but they're voting for people like Aaron O'Toole or other kind of quote unquote conservatives who are more liberal. They're voting for the more liberal conservative. They're voting for the more liberal leader, more liberal NDPers. And that's the kind of leader the boomers liked. And as they leave the electorate, because they either age out and cease voting, or tragically they die, which happens to everyone, but it's still sad, that's going to change things. And when your demographics are like Newfoundland, and you have a lot of young people returning now, relatively speaking, and a lot of old people are aging out, you start seeing a very big shift, especially when you combine it with the fisheries and the oil department. Now, will that manifest today? I don't know. I'm not sure this will impact the Newfoundland election a lot, though I think that is part of the reason why you're seeing rural Newfoundland suddenly start shifting. My 2 cents here is that the St. John's and suburb / Avalon Peninsula decline for the PC party is actually just the PCs are doing worse. Or, in other words, Andrew Furey is doing better as a premier than the previous Liberal premier. Or, sorry. He's done a better job than people expected from his 2021 campaign, is my thought. So that, on paper, he should be doing better in polling. In other words, he should have gained vote share. However, he hasn't gained that vote share, possibly because, again, there's some noise here with the NDP, but I think primarily because the rural Newfoundland area, again, this area, which obviously there's other industries here, but one of the big industries here, being fisheries, is shifting very, very significantly. And will it be enough to sweep the rural Newfoundland? No, probably not. But I think it is going to be a really big play. And when this election does happen this year, I really think it's going to end up looking like the rural areas become conservative and the urban areas become more liberal. And people will incorrectly interpret this partially, or just hand this away as global trends. But I think this is really actually just specific Newfoundland trends. Because Furey himself hasn't antagonized a lot of the oil and gas stuff. He's pro-oil and gas. He's anti-carbon tax. So that is keeping a lot of the more urban parts that should be moving away happy. Because a lot of the oil and gas stuff is centered through St. John's, at least the company headquarters and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons, by the way, Calgary is so conservative as a city, because all the oil and gas companies are headquartered there, or at least the Albertan ones. But I digress. I will wrap this one up here because I don't have too much more to say, because there's not enough data to really want to venture too much more. But if you liked this, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below. And if you're from Newfoundland, I would love to hear your 2 cents, your thoughts, anything you see going on. It's one of the provinces that is, like my own Nova Scotia, heavily ignored by the rest of the national media. So if you're not hipping with the right news sources going on, it's easy to miss what's actually happening. So if I'm wrong in any way, shape, or form, by all means comment. I'm not going to claim I'm 100% accurate, but this is what I am seeing with the data and looking at trends. Now with that, I bid you guys all adieu, and I'll see you next week with something else.